Addiction is not about drugs. It's about pain that never found a voice, about emptiness that learned to scream. You think addiction is what happens to them, the alcoholics, the junkies, the lost. But what if I told you the most common addicts never step foot in rehab? They are addicted to achievement, to validation, to the endless scroll, and the most terrifying part, they don't even know it. Carl Jung once said, "Addiction is the soul's desperate cry for wholeness." Not a chemical imbalance, not a character flaw, a spiritual fracture. Jung believed that addiction is not just a problem, it's a message. It's the psyche's way of saying, you have lost something sacred. That's why quitting the substance is not enough, because the hunger remains. And if you look closely, you will see it in yourself too. That inability to sit in silence, that urge to open an app, to chase someone's approval, to escape your own thoughts. That's addiction. And what if the cure is not sobriety, but meaning? This is not a video about drugs. This is a video about the part of you that's been running, silently, for years. And it's time to listen. We have been told a story about addiction, a simple, convenient story. It's about bad decisions, weak willpower, broken people. It's why we criminalize it, mock it, hide it. But what if that story was never true? What if everything society believes about addiction, from rehab centers to recovery slogans, is just a surface-level explanation, masking something far more human, far more terrifying? The mainstream view says addiction is a chemical hijacking of the brain, a dopamine loop, a substance abuse problem. And while that's not entirely false, it's dangerously incomplete, because this view turns addiction into a technical malfunction, something outside the soul, something that can be corrected with the right pills, programs, or punishments. But Carl Jung did not see it that way. He saw addiction not as a disease to be cured, but as a symbol, a spiritual symptom. And that idea changes everything. It means the addict is not just chemically dependent. They are existentially starving. Their substance, whether it's heroin, alcohol, sex, power, achievement, is not just a habit. It's a ritual, a failed attempt to fill an internal void that modern society refuses to even acknowledge. Let's talk about that myth, the one you have probably heard all your life. Addiction is a choice. If they wanted to stop, they would. Just use willpower, grow up. They are selfish, irresponsible, weak. But here's the truth Jung understood. Addiction is not about choice. It's about compulsion. And compulsion always points to something buried deep in the psyche. People are not addicted because they are weak. They are addicted because they are wounded. And that's the part society gets so dangerously wrong. Because by shaming addicts, we silence the very message addiction is trying to scream. Something inside me is missing. Think about it. A man drinks every night, not because he wants to ruin his life, but because it's the only moment he feels numb. A woman checks her phone 300 times a day, not because she's shallow, but because the silence in her mind terrifies her. A student obsessively works 16 hours a day, not because he loves discipline, but because he's terrified of being worthless. These are not just habits, they are coping mechanisms, unconscious attempts to self-soothe a psychological wound. And if you punish the addict without healing the wound, the addiction will simply take a new form. Carl Jung believed that every addiction was a substitute for authentic connection to the self, the deep, integrated, spiritual self that modern life keeps us cut off from. He wrote, "No one is really cured of addiction unless and until they have achieved some kind of spiritual understanding." This does not mean religion. It means meaning, wholeness, the ability to face your inner darkness and integrate it instead of escaping it. But our culture does not talk about this. We pathologize addiction, but ignore the hunger beneath it. We build rehab clinics, but destroy spiritual wisdom. We treat addicts, but mock introspection. We numb our own pain with dopamine distractions, but judge others when their distractions spiral out of control. This is why Jung's view matters so deeply today, because it tells us addiction is not a defect. It's a signal, a flare in the sky from a soul that's drowning. And the moment we start seeing it that way, not as a moral failure, but as a symbolic cry, is the moment healing becomes possible. Because only when we understand the myth of addiction can we begin the journey to face its deeper truth. Why do we reach for things that destroy us? Why, even when we know the consequences, The pain, the shame, the guilt. Do we keep returning to the bottle, the needle, the screen, the applause? Carl Jung believed the answer is simple, but terrifying. People don't have addictions. They have spiritual voids. And this void, this crushing sense of inner emptiness, is the true source of our compulsions. We live in a world that worships science but forgets the soul. A world that treats humans like machines. Inputs, outputs, hormones, habits. But Jung saw the human psyche as something sacred, a spiritual battlefield where ancient forces wrestle in silence. To Jung, addiction was not a medical disorder. It was a metaphysical cry, a symptom of a deeper loss, the loss of connection to the self, the God within. But here's the key insight. When Jung said God, he was not always referring to a religious figure in the sky. He meant something deeply psychological, the inner source of wholeness, purpose, and truth. In Jung's framework, God symbolizes the self, the integrated, fully realized version of you that lies buried beneath your persona, your traumas, and your ego. And when we are disconnected from that self, our psyche begins to leak energy, desperately trying to reconnect to something larger, something sacred. This is where Jung's concept of psychic energy becomes crucial. Psychic energy is like spiritual electricity. It powers your dreams, your fears, your creativity, your compulsions. It moves, always. It does not vanish. So, when the psyche is blocked from expressing itself authentically, when we repress emotions, ignore our wounds, or chase meaningless goals, this energy does not disappear. It diverts. And often, it diverts into addiction. Jung believed that addicts are unconsciously seeking union with the divine, not through meditation or introspection, but through artificial substitutes, substances, sensations, obsessions. A man who drinks until he blacks out is not weak. He's trying to escape a self that feels unbearable. A woman who craves love from toxic partners is not shallow. She's trying to feel seen by something greater than herself. These are spiritual longings, distorted by trauma and misunderstood by society. In a profound letter, Jung once wrote about a man struggling with alcoholism. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness. Expressed in medieval language, the union with God. In other words, addiction is the shadow of spirituality. It's a desperate reach for transcendence, just through the wrong door. Let's be brutally honest for a second. Most people today are addicts, not necessarily to drugs, but to avoidance. Addicted to distraction, addicted to work, addicted to control, addicted to approval. We scroll not because we are interested, but because we're terrified to sit still. We chase status not because we are ambitious, but because we feel invisible. We can't stop because stopping would force us to face the truth. We are in pain. We are disconnected. We are empty. But this pain is not our enemy. In Jung's view, it's our compass. Pain does not just hurt, it points. It reveals what needs healing. It shows where the soul has gone silent. It forces us to ask, what am I really hungry for? And the answer, always, is not pleasure, not distraction, not even relief. It's integration. Addicts don't need punishment. They don't need more shame. They need to recover the sacred thread that links them back to the self, the divine core that gives their suffering meaning. But here's the paradox Jung understood. The only way to escape the trap is to go deeper into it, not to numb the pain, but to listen to it, not to fight the void, but to ask what it wants to reveal. So, what's the takeaway? Addiction is not about weakness. It's not about pleasure. It's about emptiness. It's a soul screaming for reconnection, a body overwhelmed by the silence inside, a psyche that has lost its map to wholeness. And until we restore that connection, until we stop treating addiction like a disease and start honoring it as a spiritual symptom, we will keep mistaking the craving for the cure. When people hear the word addiction, they picture needles, pills, alcohol. But the most dangerous addictions today don't come in bottles or syringes. They come in pixels, in likes, in unread messages and never-ending scrolls. We are now surrounded by invisible drugs, and they are perfectly legal, socially accepted, and endlessly addictive. We check our phones hundreds of times a day. We chase the next hit of validation like lab rats chasing sugar. We binge watch, doom scroll, swipe, consume, not out of joy, but out of numbness. This is the new face of addiction. And it's even more sinister because it wears a smile. Jung warned us that modern people are spiritually starving, not for religion, but for inner connection. And when the soul is starved, it feeds on substitutes. The man who spends hours on porn isn't looking for lust. He's looking for intimacy without vulnerability. The woman who obsesses over productivity isn't just ambitious. She's terrified of stillness. The teen who posts selfies every hour isn't just vain. She's terrified of not being seen. These are not just bad habits. These are cries for wholeness, and society has cleverly packaged these cravings into billion-dollar industries. Our pain is now profitable. Let's be clear. Social media is not evil. Work is not evil. Validation is not evil. The danger lies in why we use them. Jung believed that when a person is cut off from their self, when they lose their sense of inner meaning, they become vulnerable to compulsive behavior. Why? Because they no longer know who they are without stimulation. So they chase constant noise to avoid the silence within. Addiction isn't about the object. It's about the function that object serves in your psyche. And here's the truth nobody wants to admit. The psychological mechanics of social media addiction are nearly identical to those of drug addiction. Both hijack the dopamine system. Both create tolerance, withdrawal, and compulsion. Both mask a deeper hunger that's never fully satisfied. In other words, addiction is not about what you're doing. It's about what you're avoiding. Let's take a simple example. A man wakes up and instantly grabs his phone. He scrolls through emails, news, notifications. Then Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. He doesn't even know what he's looking for, just that he can't stop. By noon, he's already checked his phone 70 times. He feels anxious, hollow, and ashamed. But why can't he stop? Because the moment he puts the phone down, he's left alone with himself. And he doesn't like what he finds there. Jung would say, he's not addicted to his phone. He's terrified of sitting with his own mind. This man isn't broken. He's just starving for stillness, for truth, for meaning. But instead of turning inward, he turns outward, again and again, hoping something will fill the void. Jung taught that our modern world is obsessed with numbing rather than integrating. We anesthetize our discomfort instead of listening to it. We sedate our symptoms instead of understanding their purpose. But the psyche doesn't work that way. What you suppress doesn't vanish. It festers. And it returns, disguised, distorted, and even more desperate. This is why modern addictions feel endless, because the craving isn't for content, it's for connection. And the only cure is not more consumption, but more consciousness. Jung's solution was never to fight addiction head-on, not with shame, not with guilt, not even with discipline. His solution was to listen, to see the addiction not as a flaw, but as a symbol, a metaphor the unconscious is using to tell you, you have lost touch with yourself. You're not scrolling because you're bored. You're scrolling because your soul is tired of being unheard. Modern addictions are traps, not because of the tools we use, but because we have forgotten the tools within. The phone is not the enemy. The work is not the enemy. The mindless pursuit of anything that numbs you from your own truth, that is the enemy. And unless we stop, reflect, and recenter, the cycle will continue. Because addiction is not just about what we're drawn to, it's about what we are running from. You can quit drinking and still feel lost. You can delete the apps and still crave distraction. You can go clean and still be addicted. Because true recovery isn't about stopping. It's about transforming. Carl Jung said something chilling. What you resist persists. And nowhere is this more true than in addiction. We think we're fighting a bad habit, but what we're really fighting is a part of ourselves. And no one wins a war against their own soul. Most people try to recover by avoiding the thing that hurt them. They replace drugs with therapy, or swap porn for productivity, or distract themselves with wellness routines and spiritual bypassing. But something always remains, a gnawing emptiness, a subtle pull, a haunting thought. Something still isn't right. Why? Because they fixed the symptom, but left the root untouched. You can remove the substance, but if you don't meet the wound, the pain beneath the addiction, it will come back in another form. Jung believed that addiction is not just a behavior, it's a message from the unconscious, a cry from the part of you that's been buried, ignored, or unloved. He called this the shadow. The shadow is the side of you hide, even from yourself. It holds the pain you never processed, the shame you buried, the unmet needs you were taught to suppress. And here's the twist. That shadow is the real source of the addiction. Not the drug, not the phone, not the dopamine, but the inner child who wasn't seen, the young self who learned that love is conditional, the wound that was too painful to feel, so it found a disguise. Imagine a man who drinks every night, not to party, not to celebrate, but to escape a feeling he doesn't understand. He tells himself he has a drinking problem, but the real problem is silence. Because in silence, he hears the voice he's been avoiding. You're not enough. You'll always be alone. That voice is not new. It's old, ancient. It belongs to a moment in childhood he never fully faced. And the alcohol? It's not the enemy. It's the shield. This is why Jung believed recovery is not about self-control. It's about self-confrontation. You don't heal addiction by cutting off the craving. You heal it by meeting the part of you that's craving something deeper. That takes courage, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet courage to sit in a room alone, with no screen, no distraction, and ask, what am I really afraid to feel? That question is the beginning of real recovery, because beneath every addiction is not just pain, but potential. Jung often used metaphors from mythology to explain the psyche. One of the most powerful is this. Addiction is like a dragon guarding a treasure. The dragon is terrifying. It breathes fire, destroys everything in its path. But behind the dragon is gold. And that gold is your true self, your soul, your wholeness. The addiction isn't there to destroy you. It's there to protect you from facing the thing you weren't ready to face until now. Recovery isn't slaying the dragon. It's understanding it, asking, why are you here? What have you been trying to protect me from? This is what Jung called shadow work. It's not easy. It doesn't give quick highs or overnight success, but it gives something infinitely more powerful, integration. The moment you stop seeing your addiction as a monster and start seeing it as a messenger is the moment healing truly begins. You see, the addict isn't weak. The addict is someone with unprocessed intensity, unspoken truth, a hunger for something sacred that was never mirrored by the world. The escape isn't failure. It's the first clue that there's something in you that wants to be found. Jung believed that inside every addiction is the seed of transformation, but it can only grow when we stop running and start listening. So the real question is not, how do I stop? It's, what is this pain trying to teach me? What am I really longing for? Because the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. It's authenticity. It's becoming whole, facing the dragon, claiming the treasure, and realizing that what you thought was your weakness was really the doorway to yourself. Most recovery programs focus on one thing: control. Control your urges, control your triggers, control your environment. But Carl Jung believed that true healing does not come from control. It comes from wholeness. And that journey toward wholeness, Jung called it individuation. Individuation is not about becoming perfect. It's not about eliminating your flaws. It's about becoming real. It's the process of discovering every part of yourself, even the ones you were taught to fear, hide, or hate, and integrating them into a cohesive, conscious self. I'd rather be whole than good. Carl Jung. This is not self-improvement. It's self-reclamation. It's realizing that the parts of you tried to get rid of, the anger, the desire, the pain, were never your enemies. They were parts of your story waiting to be understood. Addiction keeps us fragmented. It splits us. There's the you that functions during the day, and the you that escapes at night. There's the mask and the wound behind it. But individuation says, bring all of you to the table. You can't heal what you won't face. You can't transform what you still reject. Individuation begins when you stop asking, how do I fix myself? And start asking, who am I really, beneath the fear, the craving, the mask? At the heart of individuation is the shadow, the part of the psyche that holds everything you've repressed. To become whole, you must confront this shadow, not destroy it, not suppress it, but meet it, dialogue with it, integrate it. Jung believed that healing happens when the conscious mind meets the unconscious, when you no longer push away your pain, but allow it to speak. Because the parts of you fear the most often hold your deepest truth. This is what separates real recovery from behavioral control. Behavioral recovery says, don't do that. Individuation says, why are you doing that? Behavioral recovery punishes relapse. Individuation studies it, asks what unmet need it reveals. Behavioral recovery is about surviving the day. Individuation is about reclaiming your life. You see, the wound you carry contains energy. And when that energy is unconscious, it controls you. But when it's made conscious, it can transform you. This is what Jung meant by transmutation. Pain can become purpose. Longing can become insight. The addiction that once felt like death can become a doorway to rebirth. Imagine this, a woman addicted to validation. She posts, she performs, she pretends, but inside, she feels hollow. She begins Jungian work. Instead of quitting the behavior cold turkey, she studies it. She realizes her addiction to being seen is really a fear of being unseen, a wound from childhood where she felt invisible. And slowly, she starts to change, not by force, but by understanding. She writes, she reflects. She connects to that young version of herself and tells her, I see you now. That's transformation. That's individuation. Individuation doesn't remove your past. It redeems it. It says, your addiction wasn't random. It was an invitation to meet yourself, to walk into the darkness and come out with light, to stop asking the world to fill your void, and start becoming the presence you've always needed. Jung said, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Addiction is often a way to avoid suffering, but individuation teaches us that some suffering is sacred. It's part of the alchemy that turns brokenness into beauty. You suffer not because you're weak, but because you are being asked to wake up, to live from the soul, not just the surface. This is why rules alone can't heal you. Rules control behavior, but meaning transforms identity. And recovery without meaning is fragile. You may stay sober, but feel empty. You may stay clean, but stay lost. But when your healing has meaning, when you see your wounds not as curses but callings, then the path becomes sustainable. Because you are not just avoiding the fall. You're building something deeper, a self rooted in truth, a life aligned with the soul. So the real recovery does not begin when you quit the substance. It begins when you quit hiding from yourself. Individuation is the call to return, not to who you were before the addiction, but to who you were always meant to become. Not just sober, but soulful. Not just functioning, but fully alive. Addiction wears many faces. Some shoot heroin, some scroll endlessly, some chase success, sex, shopping, or approval. But behind all these masks is one common wound, emptiness, and here's the truth. Everyone's addicted to something, because everyone is running from something. Somewhere along the way, we learn to silence the soul, to numb instead of feel, to perform instead of be. But Carl Jung did not see addiction as weakness. He saw it as a symbol, a cry from the unconscious, a longing not for dopamine, but for divinity. Addiction, in Jung's view, is not about pleasure. It's about pain, a hunger for meaning dressed up as craving. And maybe you feel that hunger, that ache you can't explain, the scrolling that won't stop, the drinking that feels like drowning, the working that never satisfies. But listen carefully. That emptiness is not your enemy. It's your invitation. Jung once wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." Maybe your hell is addiction, but maybe that descent is the only path to depth. To find the light, you must face the dark. You are not broken. You are being called, not to escape yourself, but to meet yourself. Your craving is not a curse, it's a compass. And maybe, just maybe, your soul is not screaming for drugs, distraction, or approval. It's screaming for God. And when you finally listen, you will realize you were never empty. You were just looking in the wrong place.